Today we continue our journey with Jesus to the cross. It's part 5. We're going to stay in the Gospel of John and pick up where we left off at the end of John chapter 18. Jesus had gone before Pilate for the first time. They had had this conversation where Pilate challenges him and asks him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus really calls Pilate out and says, "Who put you up to this? Who put you up behind this? What's the motive behind this?" And Pilate and him have this conversation, and Jesus makes this powerful statement in verse 37. He says, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came to the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on this side of the truth listens to me." And Pilate would end the conversation walking away saying, "What is truth? What is truth? And does it even matter?" Pilate would go before the Jewish people and say, "I find no reason to bring a charge against him. But as is your custom, every year I release a prisoner to you. Would you like me to release him and set him free?" And the people said no. They said, "We want Barabbas. We don't want Jesus. We want him crucified." Chapter 19 is where we will pick up verse 1. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. Pilate took Jesus and he had him beaten. He had him whipped. He was hurt greatly. The scripture tells us, the prophet, I believe it was Isaiah, tells us that by his stripes we are healed. They would have taken a whip. I believe it's called a cat of tails or a cat of 9 tails, and they would take a whip, and on the end of the whip it would have bone and rock, and it was jagged. And what they would do, and I'm sorry that this is graphic, but I need you to understand, they would walk up and they would whip, and the tails would go around and get into the chest. And if you can just imagine, they would rip the flesh off the body as they pulled it off. And it says that the soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and they mashed it down on his head. He would have been bleeding profusely all around his body. He would have been almost unrecognizable. And it says that they clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." They mocked him. They slapped him in the face. They whipped him, and they beat our Lord. Verse 4. Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to him, "Here is the man." As soon as the chief priests, as soon as the officers saw him, they shouted, "Crucify, crucify." And another gospel would tell us that they riled up the crowd. They would get everyone around to say, "Crucify, crucify." But Pilate answered, "You take him, you crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." But the Jewish leaders insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law, he must die, because he claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. Now, before we pick back up in the story, I need to explain some history to you that you won't find in the Bible, but as we study history, we learn more about what influenced the decisions, how people felt in a moment. You see, the Jewish leaders, they hated Jesus because he challenged the status quo. He challenged the way that they lived and they operated. Basically, he called them out for the injustices and the way that they weren't representing God well. Well, Pilate, in this situation, he's the governor in this Roman province, and he had had problems. His historical documents show us that he had had problems governing the Jewish people. They were a little difficult to deal with. And there were uprisings, just like we learned about with Barabbas, and there were problems all the time. And Caesar, the Roman leader and the Roman leadership, would tell Pilate, "You need to take care of this. You need to stop having all these problems. Pilate, you're not leading well. If you keep not leading well, you're going to lose your position." So Pilate was feeling pressure from his boss and from those that were underneath him. He was between a rock and a hard place. And that's why, as the story goes on, he's concerned. There had been riots. He didn't want there to be more riots. He didn't want to risk his position and his family. And so even though he didn't feel like Jesus did anything wrong, he was under intense pressure. peer pressure, leadership pressure. He was under pressure. And in verse 9, it says that he was afraid and he went back inside the palace and he began another conversation with Jesus. He said to Jesus, "Where do you come from?" But Jesus did not reply. And Pilate said to him in verse 10, "Do you refuse to speak to me? Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you?" He looked at Jesus and he said, "Don't you realize I have the power to set you free and I have the power to end your life?" Jesus would finally reply, verse 11, such a powerful statement. "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. You have no power unless it be given to you from on high. You have no power unless it be given to you by the Lord. You have no power over me. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." Ooh, the Lord of this world looks at Pilate and he says, "You have no power unless God gives it to you." Remember, in every situation, this is for us, this is for me. Remember, in every situation, you have no power, you have no authority unless God gives it to you. I don't own anything. I steward everything that's God's. And it says in verse 12, from then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free. Pilate knew he had messed up. Oh, Pilate knew. Pilate knew that something was wrong. Pilate knew that he had made a mistake. There's a story in another one of the Gospels that gives us greater detail where his wife had a dream, and in this dream, she knew that they shouldn't crucify Jesus, and she told Pilate, she said, "Pilate, don't have anything to do with this." She said to her husband, she said, "Pilate, you need to set this Jesus free. You don't need to touch this man." And Pilate knew what he was doing was wrong. God had shown him that what he was doing was wrong, and that's why there's this picture, and we won't break it down today, but there's this picture in another gospel where he went before the people and he washed his hands before the people and he said, "I am innocent of all man's blood. I am innocent of this man's blood. You're doing this, not me." Pilate knew what he was doing was wrong. And he tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." The Jewish people who were always opposing Caesar are now claiming Caesar. They're now referencing Pilate's boss to try to pressure Pilate to do what they want him to do. When Pilate heard this, verse 13, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement. It was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted to him, "Take him away. Take him away. Crucify him." Pilate asked, "Shall I crucify your king?" And the people replied. The chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified. It's amazing what pressure can cause us to do. I don't know if you've ever felt pressured in your life, pressured to make a decision, pressured to go in a direction that you didn't feel comfortable with, but it's amazing how pressure can put us in situations where we'll do things that we never thought that we would do. People will walk away from careers. People will walk away from marriages. People will walk away from family. People will walk away from relationships. People will walk away from their values. People will walk away. People can feel pressured, and they can, in their pressure, they can turn to things that they never would have turned to before. I don't know why, but I feel led to share this with you. No one wakes up one day and says, "I want to be an alcoholic." Most of the time, there's stress that leads them to turn to a drink instead of to God. And then what's one drink becomes two, becomes three, becomes four, becomes a habit that they hide, which compounds more stress, which creates more issues. And there's family pains and there's hurts. Here's the reality. It all started with pressure. Pilate was under pressure. We always look at the story through the lens of Jesus and through the lens of ourselves, but here's the reality. Pilate was a leader who was over much and was also under authority, and there was pressure. And as a leader, I would say in this moment, he failed greatly. He didn't do the right thing at the right time. There's going to be times in our life where we're going to be under pressure. There's going to be people in the world, there's going to be people in our world, there's going to be people in our lives that are going to pressure us to do things that we know aren't the right thing. I want to encourage you that in those moments, God's with you. You say, I feel alone. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. As I mentioned before in Matthew 28, Jesus said as he left and gave the Great Commission, he said, I'm with you always, even to the ends of this age. Jesus is with you always. And if you don't know what to do, invite God into the moment and ask him, God, what's the wise thing to do? What's your purpose, not my preference? What's your will for this situation? And God, would you help me to walk this out? Because on my own, I feel overwhelmed. But I know that with you, I can make it through this moment. And you'll see me through to the other side. Close with this. Yea, though I walk through the valley in the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Even though I walk through tough times, I know that God is protecting me, preserving me, and preparing me. He prepares the table in the presence of our enemies. He goes before us. Surely goodness and mercy will follow us all the days of our lives. Be blessed today.